Okay, Katie, I think you can get started,
Okay.
and I'll admit people
Sure,
if
great,
they come in late.
awesome. So my name is Katie Benson. I'm a financial educator and counselor at Opportunities Credit Union. And so we have this program called Money Sense that does this one-on-one personal, confidential financial counseling. And recently we've been kind of branching out to do a little bit more of these just education workshops for people. And so today we're going to be kind of looking at that information that a lot of us miss transitioning out of high school. So, the first time you're really taking control of your own finances, figuring out how to make your own budget, what's going on with credit, what is a credit score, what does it mean, how do you get one? And then kind of the continuation of that, which is debt. And we'll also spend a little bit of time on the costs of continuing education, a little bit of specific information on student loans. So there's definitely a lot here. There are a few places that I have to stop for questions, but if you want to just pop those in the chat as well, whenever you think of them, and I'll get to them, and hopefully we'll get through everything pretty quickly. So if you guys have budgeted before, I think you know that it can feel really restricting. And that's kind of the way we talk about it in our society, as this like really stiff and difficult and unpleasant thing. But really the basic of budgeting is just making sure that your income and your expenses are balanced, that you're not spending more than you're earning, and that everything is going where you want it to be going. Your budget is always going to be completely personal. You can't just grab a budget offline and have it work for your situation. It depends on your values and your needs. Budgeting you can do it a lot of different ways. There are lots of different apps you can use. Lots of people use like Excel or Google Sheets. It really doesn't matter. The two main steps you need to take are just tracking your spending and earnings. Actually, you want to track both of them, and then you can make your modifications. So those are kind of the two big things you need to do, and that helps you save for what you need. When we talk about tracking, you want to be looking at everything. So when we look at income, there's what most people think of as their typical income, as like from a job, a wage that you get. But then you also want to be tracking if you make commission, if you work in a restaurant, your income's unpredictable. Maybe you're in school and you only work over the summer, or maybe you get a financial present for graduation or for your birthday or something. You want to make sure that you're seeing all of those streams coming in. And then if you're looking to increase your income, see if there are ways you can use those categories to do that. And there are just some, examples on the right here. I'm not going to read through them all. But I want to start the idea going in your brain that, you can get creative with it. I think the main thing people think of when we talk about budgeting is cutting down expenses. And that's what makes it feel really restrictive. But really, there are ways you can do it that don't feel like you're missing out on things you want to be doing in life. So I really recommend splitting your expenses into these different categories so that you can prioritize what needs to go out, and then making sure you have enough money for the things you want to be spending it on. All right, I know we've got a few people kind of still coming in. So I just want to quickly go back and say that we're covering a lot of topics today. This first one is just on budgeting. But if you guys have any questions, pop them in the chat or raise your hand and I'll try to listen to you. So actually, I want to kind of get everybody involved with this. Has anyone tried to budget before, or like tried to cut down on some spending because they thought it was too high? And you can maybe throw in the chat what it was, how it went for you, or we can unmute you and you can shout it out.
Yeah, I can read from the chat as folks put things in
Great.
there.
And, if no one's feeling like, throwing it out there on a Saturday morning, that's fine. A big one for a lot of people is going out to eat. I think that's a category where a lot of people spend more money than they realize. And then when they, go back and look at their spending, say, oh my God, how could that be? And so what you can do instead of saying, oh, I can't order delivery anymore, or I need to stop going out for coffee, finding a way that you can just lower the amount while still doing it sometimes. And an example of this might be that you're buying coffee every day in the morning. And instead of doing that, you pick, Monday morning and Friday morning, because those are the hardest ones for you. And you buy your coffee on those 2 days, and the rest of the week you make your own. So it doesn't have to be a total restriction, a total cutout. You can just kind of bring it down. In general, these are just some good tips for making sense of some good ways to just kind of save money, make sure your spending is aligning with your values. Most of the spending that people feel unhappy with after the fact is impulse spending. So if you plan ahead and you make a list and you know what you're looking for, it's much easier to make purchases that you're really happy with in the long term. Having that list also means that you have more options to maybe find it for cheaper, wait for a sale, find other ways to get it. Can you borrow it? A bunch of the libraries around here do a library of things where, you can borrow garden clippers, a printer, things like that. And then the other thing, and this is maybe a little bit of a weird wording for it, but creating distance between your impulse to buy and the actual purchase is really, really valuable, because it just stops that moment when you're, online shopping, lying in bed, and you just press the checkout button and suddenly that money's gone. If instead you just leave it in your cart, come back the next day, a lot of times people will have a different understanding of what they want, which can help them, save money. The goal of this, of course, is saving. And it's really important to start saving because you change how you're thinking from the present to thinking about your future and making good choices for your future self. So if you can just start small, with whatever feels comfortable for you. And I recommend using some kind of visual aid to remind yourself what it's for. So it's not just me on Zoom saying, you should save your money. It's you thinking, oh, I really want to get a new phone, so I'm going to save up for that. These are some things you might be saving up for. I want to just highlight one thing here, which is that first one, which is the emergency fund. An emergency fund is going to be different from other types of savings because it's an amount that you will build up and use and then continue to build up. So with an emergency fund, we're imagining, let's say you have a car. Cars always need work, right? Like if you have a car, you're pretty much guaranteed you're going to have to pay for repairs at least once a year, right? So having an emergency fund for that unexpected car repair is really great, and you use it for that, and you don't ever need to feel guilty about that, and then you build it back up. The other things here, like going on vacation, maybe you save up a certain amount and then you spend it on your vacation and then it's done. So with an emergency fund, it's meant to be used and then restocked. All right, this is the last little bit of our savings, and just some ways you might think about getting a little bit more out of your savings because you might be able to earn money. On the left here, we have the tax advantaged accounts. So what that means is you're paying less taxes on it, or it's being taken out of your paycheck before taxes come out. These are just some common ones. In particular, if you're planning on continuing education, the Vermont 529 can be really helpful for saving up for college. And then on the other side, we have ways that your savings might build money. So by having higher interest, like a high interest savings account where you can still access that money, or even something like a CD or an investment where you maybe can't touch the money for a little bit. All right, so I'm gonna pause here for a second and see if there's any questions on that topic. I know it's a lot of information. I might have talked a little fast.
There aren't any in the chat right now. But I'm wondering too, if the folks in the chat also want to just highlight maybe what you want to make sure you hear from Katie today. If there was something from the presentation you really wanted to hear, that would be fun to see, but no questions right now, Katie.
Okay. Yeah, if there's anything in particular you're looking to get out of this today, I'd love to talk about it. And I will just take a look at those. When we get a little further, I'll give you time to type. I always get a little bit overwhelmed in Zooms when we're putting in questions, because it takes me a minute to think of it and it takes me a little while to type it, and by then we've moved on. So take your time, we'll get to it. So I think credit can be a really confusing topic for a lot of people, because we use it in a lot of different ways, kind of throw it around a lot. But basically, when we're talking about credit in finance, we're looking at money that you are able to borrow. So we'll talk about someone's credit report, which is the history of the money they've borrowed and how they've repaid it. And we'll talk about a credit score. And so all lenders today practice what's called risk-based lending. So they are trying to estimate what a borrower's ability to repay is going to be like based on their past. And they do that by looking at your credit score. So there are lots of different ways you can check your credit. It is never harmful to your credit score to check your credit just to see what's going on. There are a few ways you can do it. I really recommend annual credit reports. They are government guaranteed, so there's no ads, there's nothing kind of like that. A lot of the other free ones do contain ads, but like Credit Karma, Credit Sesame are really popular. But with your credit score, I want you to kind of think about it as a letter grade instead of a particular number. So this like excellent category isn't, 98%. It's, we'll say 90 to 100%. And so it's not, sometimes people get hung up on the exact number because it can be very weird, like 724. But if it's 724 or 728, it doesn't matter as long as it's within the category that the lender is looking for. And it will depend on the lender. But I'm realizing that I haven't told you what credit is good for. So having good credit means you can get a loan. And so a loan is helpful when you need to spend more money than you have saved. So for most people, that comes up, with bigger purchases like student loans, paying for school, a car loan, a home loan, things like that. Or maybe a loan to, do something that I'm blanking on right now, but maybe like a car repair we see a lot as well, where it's, a few $1,000s. The higher your credit score, typically the lower your interest rate will be. And as we'll kind of talk about a little bit later, lower interest rate means you're saving more money in the long term. You will also find that some landlords check your credit history as well. And so that can be kind of tricky because your credit score is made up of information from these 5 categories. And if you have never used credit before, so if you've never borrowed money, you don't have a credit score. And that is seen as negative, right? So if you've never borrowed money, you don't have a credit score, and that's a bad thing. So I have a good friend who, worked really hard, never wanted to be in debt, paid for her school completely without ever taking student loans. And then, at 25, 26, she wanted to move to Chicago, and all of the apartments required a credit report. And she had no history. She'd always bought cars outright. And so, to her, she had had really good, healthy financial practices, but to the lenders and to the apartment managers, they knew nothing about her and nothing about how she repays money. So using credit, getting credit requires using it. The most important thing is that you make your payments on time. And that's this big old category here. But then the other things they look at are how much of your credit you're using, how long you've been using it, are you applying for a lot of credit at the same time? And sometimes I think it's helpful to think about this, like if you are lending money to a friend, and you lend money to your friend and they never pay you back. And then a couple years later, they come back to you, or a couple months later, and they ask to borrow money again. You might be less likely to lend them money because you know that they aren't paying you back. All right. Let's see. Sorry, I wonder if I'm able to adjust that. Okay. Then these are some kind of questions that we can kind of answer to look at how you might improve your credit. So the easiest thing to do is just make sure your information is correct on there. You want to make on-time payments. If you have a credit card, keep the balance lower on it. And then you may also look into a credit building product, a secure credit card, or a credit building loan. And I'm happy to go into more detail about those or about anything about credit, but I'm gonna put you guys on the spot again if you want to get ready. Oh, this is okay, never mind. I'm not gonna put you on the spot. I used to have this slide be questions to get people to answer. But these are some common misconceptions that I see from people where they think that, they might need a certain amount of savings to have a high credit score, or that if they're unable to make a loan payment, they can just send in however much they have. So maybe if you guys want to just throw out there, if you believed any of these things before now, or let me know if there are anything you have heard maybe about credit that you aren't sure is true. And I'm going to try to adjust my microphone a little bit for that noise. Okay, great. All right, so I guess the last one, nope, okay. I'm sorry, I am sharing some space and a loud mechanical keyboard in here. Audio, let's see if this fixes it. How do did we get that a little bit better? Maybe no, okay. I'm sorry, guys. I don't think there's anything I can do about that then. Are you still able to hear me? Yeah, just a little annoying. Okay. The last thing I want to just bring up on here is that you'll need to be careful if you, anytime you put your name on a loan. So if someone asks you to co-sign a loan, or if you're a parent with a student looking to take out additional loans for school, anytime you're on a loan, you are responsible for it. And so if the main borrower doesn't repay for any reason, you are 100% fully liable. So be really careful signing for co-signing for a loan with a friend, because you want to, if you do that, make sure that you are willing and able to take it on entirely yourself in case just, you know, anything bad happens. Once you take out a loan with your credit, you have debt, which is no fun. A quick definition here, we're going to just talk about two different types. We have installment debt, which has like your student loan, your car loan, a certain amount you pay every month. It's the same, interest rate's the same, it's due on the same day of the month, everything's great. Revolving debt is like a credit card, and the amount you pay every month is different. The interest rate can change, and instead of a amount that you borrow, you have a credit limit that you can borrow up to, and you just repay and borrow and repay and borrow like that. Now, you will have an amount that they tell you is the minimum. And I want to show you an example of what paying the minimum means. So I have some different numbers here. We're just assuming an 18% APR, which is stands for annual percentage rate. It's the amount of money that the loan costs over a year. So interest, points, fees, anything like that. And then let's say you're borrowing $500, you put $500 on a credit card. Maybe you are buying some textbooks for school, and they say, okay, you only have to pay $20. And so what that means, if you only pay that $20, is that you will end up paying it off in just under 3 years, and you'll pay an additional $131. And what you might decide is it's worth it for you to have that time to pay it off and make smaller payments for those almost 3 years. However, as we increase the balance, the amount that you're borrowing, the amount of interest you end up paying and the length of time really grows. And so this last one here is kind of the scary one, right? So you put $2,500 on your credit card. Maybe you're furnishing your first apartment, you know, and you go to Ashley Home Furniture and you get your bed, a desk, all of that, a chair. It's, you know, $2,500, and they say, do you want to finance that today? Which means you're putting it up, that they'll open a credit card for you, that you'll put this on. And then they say you only have to pay $40. Well, you only have to pay $40, but you pay $40 for over 15 years. And by the time you've paid it all off, the total cost is almost 3 times the amount you initially borrowed. So as much as you can, always pay more than the minimum on a credit card. This second section here shows how, you know, let's say we're in that same situation, you're paying $40, maybe you decide you can do $40 each paycheck, you get paid twice a month, or maybe you decide you can do it 3 times a month and you're putting 120 towards it. With that, each time you're really drastically bringing down the amount of interest that you pay, the interest being just the money that you're spending to have the loan. So if you take one thing from this today, always pay off as much of your credit card as you can. These are some little vocabulary things.
Katie, I have a question about debt.
Yes.
And now might not be a good time to ask it, but does it happen sometimes where someone has borrowed money to buy for something and then they want to buy something else, but they've run out, like they can't take out any more
Yes.
loans or credits? Okay, can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So there are kind of two things that I'm thinking of with your question. So let's say you have a credit card and you'll have a credit limit. And let's say your limit is $1,000. You spend 900 of it, and you want to put $200 on it. You won't be able to. You've hit your limit, and the card won't work. The other thing is that, and this is getting a little more complicated, but lenders will look at something called your debt to income ratio, or DTI, and will not give people loans if it puts them over a percentage of income that they're required to pay for loans. So, you know, if your own, usually this is like 50%, but it's lower for housing payments and a few other specific situations. But there does come a stage where if your income has stayed the same, you won't be able to borrow any more money, because the lender says, we don't think you can pay it back if you're putting that much money towards paying off these other loans.
I was just thinking about students I work with who might maybe want to finance something through a credit card, but then they want to be able to take out student loans, or they've taken out student loans and they graduate, and then they want to look at getting a car loan or maybe even a mortgage, and all of a sudden they can't. So it's just thinking about, maybe it works to borrow it now, but also thinking about the bigger things that you might want to borrow for, is that it can affect that ability. And actually, and me, I'm thinking about me too. That's what happened in my life after my student loans, is it affected what I could borrow after that.
And one of the things that we've seen recently is because of the what's it called? The fact that people don't have to pay student loans right now, that like pause.
Yeah, there's people don't have to pay them, and there isn't any interest rate building on the federal student loans. But
yes,
for private loans, yes, they're still, but you still have to pay those.
And so what that means is, so when people calculate your DTI, or debt to income ratio, they use your minimum payment. And so for most people with their student loan, they have whatever their minimum payment is. If you're having trouble, you might be on an income-driven repayment plan where your minimum payment is a little bit lower. And because we're in this period where people aren't paying their student loans, they don't have a minimum payment due, but the lenders still need to know what your payment will be. And if you don't have a record of that, they'll use 1% of your balance, which can be a lot for your student loans, and it can be more than you're paying monthly. It can be more than what you had been paying. So a lender might say, you know, 1% of your student loans is whatever, $600 a month. I'm making up numbers here. And you know, you can't afford any other loans. You can't afford a house because of that. Whereas they're actually only paying $300 a month. It's a problem. Yeah, it's definitely something to think about. Another thing that you want to be thinking about is the long-term cost of your loan. So this is, again, a lot of numbers. I was trying to show some examples because with all of this information, everything is kind of balanced with each other. So the length of the loan is going, or the interest that you pay is going to depend on the length of the loan, the amount of the loan, and your credit score. So in this example, I'm looking at like a car, for instance, and we're looking at how the different terms, which is the length of the loan, and the different interest rates change your monthly payment and the total amount of interest you pay, right? So I'm really sorry about how many numbers there are here. I know it's a little bit overwhelming. But in this situation, we're looking at paying off this loan in 3 years, and you have an incredibly low interest rate, 3%. This is very low for a car. And what that means is your monthly payment is $471. You pay less than $800 in interest. Like, that's great. That's incredible. But $471 is still a lot of money. It might be more than you can really afford. So what they might do is say, well, you know, don't worry about that. We can pull the term of the loan out. We can make it longer. But what always happens in that situation is the interest increases. So I want to bring you to this column here, where they're saying, you know, can you do 360? We'll do it for 84 months, which is like 7 years. But because the percentage has jumped up, you end up paying so much more in interest. You know, you end up almost buying the vehicle over again in interest. So this is just kind of to get you thinking about how those numbers interact, what kind of things you can expect. If you go to a dealership for a car and they say, oh, we can just extend the term of the loan to make a lower payment for you, understand that that means it's going to be more expensive in the long term. This is kind of a more realistic car payment. We have 60 months, which is 5 years, 7%. This is pretty standard. You're never going to see something like this, unfortunately, where you have 7 years to pay it off at 3%. But this is, you know, this is the dream. This is the goal one. Okay, I'm going to try to speed up now because I know we're getting close to time. So if you're having trouble paying back loans, the number one thing, oh, sorry, wrong one. When you're paying back loans, you can prioritize it however you want. Highest interest is called the Snowball Method. People love it. It saves you the most money in the long term. But sometimes I think that paying the smallest one first can be really helpful because it like starts it psychologically for you and you feel good crossing it off your list. Whatever works, you know. If you're having trouble, the number one thing to do is contact your servicer. Let them know what's going on. They can't help you if they don't know. And the worst thing you can do is just like ignore them contacting you, right? So first thing to do is contact them. If we're talking about a student loan, which I'm kind of focusing on a little bit today, because I know that we're, you know, this is a day looking at possibly going to college. You can talk about income-driven repayment plans. Another thing you might do is see if you can refinance or consolidate. And so in both of those situations, you're changing the loan to be a little different, possibly be less. It might not be the best situation in all circumstances, but it can be really helpful. And then these are kind of the consequences of if you aren't able to pay your debt. So the first thing that happens usually within 15 days is that there is a late fee that's assessed. And then after 30 days, you start getting reported as delinquent. There are 3 stages of delinquency: 30, 60, and 90 days. And at that time, you know, you're still getting fees added. You might see a change in your interest rate, and it's going to start hurting your credit score. After that, we have the category of charge-offs and collections. So these are when the lender has kind of decided that they aren't expecting the borrower to pay them back. And so it becomes just a straight number. They might sell it to a collection company whose job is to call the borrower and see if they can get that money. Now, if the loan is secured, which means that there is some asset on the line, an asset being money, your car, house, something like that, then that can be repossessed. When we're talking about a mortgage, that would mean eviction, foreclosure, all that bad stuff that we don't want to get to. And it might even get to the point of like a legal action where a court declares that the borrower legally has to pay their debt, and you might see wage garnishment. Now, at the bottom here is bankruptcy, but what bankruptcy is intended to do is wipe out debts that a person cannot pay, and it kind of starts you back over at zero. So if you have a lot of assets, those will be sold, but they're not going to like sell your clothes. You know, you can still keep your car, you may be able to keep your house. And it's for when you get into a situation that you really, that's just really, really hard. That said, bankruptcy cannot discharge student loans or some like court fees. But we don't want to see you get there. I'm sure you guys will be great. And now our last section here is just going to be talking about the cost of continuing education, paying for college. And, you know, I'm sure you guys know this already, but there are some hidden costs sometimes. You know, you want to make sure that you're considering that plane ticket if you're going somewhere out of state. Everything is going to be different, and you might not know exactly what the costs are going to be until a little bit further into the process. Here are some examples. We're looking at UVM here. This is a good example of how in-state tuition can be a lot lower than out-of-state tuition. And then I also have a comparison here for CCV, because I wanted to show that some schools charge differently. So at CCV, they charge for credit. So if we look at this one here for UVM, this is their tuition for a year of between 16 and 19 credits. So I use that 16 to 19 multiplied by the cost of 280, stuck with in-state just to make the numbers easier. And you see that you have kind of a wider spread here. So this might be a really good option if you were thinking about taking a few credits at a time. Maybe you don't want to be enrolled full-time, but you want to do partial enrollment. And then the other thing that I want to highlight here, just jumping back and forth a little bit, is that, you know, at UVM, we're looking at the cost of housing and meals, whereas looking at this here, obviously CCV doesn't have that cost included. So if you are staying with friends, staying with family, you may find that your cost is lower. So it's really hard to estimate what that exact cost is going to be. But make sure you're kind of, so, sorry, I lost my track there. You want to think about as much as you can what those are. And then I have here, you know, some things that I certainly didn't hear a lot about when I was graduating from high school, but vocational trainings can be shorter, less expensive, and lead you straight into a career. You may also want to look into apprenticeship programs where you're paid working on the job. So you get training and a certificate at the end of that. So these are just a few that I found, but there are lots of different programs out there. And I'm sure that our friendly folks at VSAC are very able to help with it as well. The other thing that our friendly folks at VSAC can help you with is the FAFSA. So FAFSA is super, super important. Part of that conversation about how much your schooling costs is going to depend on your financial aid. And this is why I say that you might not know the cost of your schooling until later in the process. For an example, for myself, when I was applying, I was looking at two schools, one of which was the university in my hometown, and then one of which was a, you know, tiny liberal arts college across the country. And the aid package I got was very different because that little liberal arts college had an endowment. And so they were able to provide grants for me that made it actually less expensive, even though the sticker price was maybe twice as much as the sticker price for the university in my hometown. So I use that as an example just to really drill in the importance of applying for FAFSA and not crossing something off your list because you don't think you can afford it when there may be grants available, scholarships, etc. We have some resources here. Again, get creative. I sometimes think about scholarships as like, if you can spend a day of work, an 8-hour workday applying for scholarships and make $1,000, $2,000, even $500, that's probably the best pay you'll make for like a long time. And if you think about the hourly wage of that, it really makes it feel pretty good and makes it a little bit less tedious, because I know applying for scholarships is tedious. It takes a long time and there's a lot to sort through because sometimes they apply to a really specific situation and they only, provide financing for 1 or 2 people. When you're funding your education, grants and scholarships are kind of the first step you want to look at because it's free money that you don't have to pay back. After that, I recommend personal and family savings as much as it's comfortable. Obviously, you don't want to put yourself or your family in a difficult situation. But then after that, seeing if you can pay your way at all with work study or part-time job, and then finally loans. And now we get to some kind of quick differences between different types of loans that you might have. And the first distinction we're going to look at is federal versus private student loans. Federal student loans have a borrowing limit, which is why some people end up taking student loans. But for the most part, federal student loans offer a few more benefits in terms of having more repayment plans, more loan forgiveness, and typically a lower interest rate, although that's not always true. With private student loans, they do require usually a credit score, so you might have to get a cosigner. The interest is going to vary, and it's always just going to vary on who the particular lender is. So some private student loans have loan modification or forgiveness, but it really depends on who they are. Go a little bit deeper into federal student loans, we have subsidized and unsubsidized, and it basically is just the subsidized student loans, you are not responsible for the interest. Technically, you're still charged interest, but the US government pays for it, but it's essentially like they're not gaining interest. However, the amount, there is a lower limit of what you can borrow, and it's only available for undergraduates. So if you're going to graduate school, you have to take out an unsubsidized loan, or if you are needing a little bit more funding than you can get with a subsidized student loan, you may want to look at unsubsidized as well. The interest is accrued the whole time. So an unsubsidized student loan taken out as a freshman is going to be different than taken out as a senior because of that interest. All right, my last slide, just some fun websites that I like. Love NerdWallet. They have lots of great information, comparing things, kind of breaking things down into easy to read language. I think the Financial Diet has some good advice for kind of breaking out of that consumerist cycle that we see a lot in wanting to spend money to keep up with everything. And then if you get really interested in all of this and you want to dig a little deeper, Investopedia, I think, is a really great website as well. Okay, and now we have about 15 minutes for questions. So if you want to come off mute or put them in the chat or come on video, whatever you like, I'm happy to talk about anything. Or if you want me to go back to anything, I know I kind of sped through a little bit.
I will keep an eye in the chat, but I don't see anything just yet.
Okay. Or I would really love a little feedback if you guys want to tell me something you learned or something that you were surprised about.
I don't have any questions, so I just want to say thank you and bye.
Great.
Bye. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Yeah, thank you.
Katie, I just want to add one detail about the federal loans that you talked about.
Great.
And the ones, the subsidized where the government pays them, they just pay them while you're in school. And then once you complete or you aren't enrolled in your program again, they do start having interest. And so they do start getting bigger. They just don't get bigger while you're enrolled. So I'll just say hello to everybody while we're waiting for some questions. I'm Jessica Smith. I work at VSAC for the Gear Up grant, and my job is specifically to help students who are a part of the Gear Up program once they graduate from high school through the summer and then transitioning into the fall. So you have both Katie and I here. Katie is a financial expert, and then I can answer questions just about, how do you figure it all out? Or tell you some of the most common questions that I hear from students in that summer transition. Happy to answer questions. I'm also curious of if all of you are in high school, if you have ideas about what you want to do, if there's anything that we can help specifically answer for you, please let us know.
I have a few questions.
Yeah,
So,
let's hear them.
When on the slide about FAFSA, you mentioned not knowing the true cost of school until after receiving the financial aid package. Could you go a little deeper into kind of what that would be, like the financial aid package, how that kind of works?
Yeah, I think that
You want me
this
to talk about it a little bit?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was Blythe that asked that question. I think, yes. So to go more into depth about it, stop me if I'm not going in the direction that you wanted to, but one thing to think about with FAFSA is it is a key that unlocks all student aid. So even if you don't think that you're going to be eligible for federal money or federal grants, it's still your school that you want to go to still might be able to use it to give you some money. That there's all these different pools of money, and each school has their own pool of money. So it's possible that they have money that they could give you. And then the timing of it all from supporting students, I'll tell you, doesn't make any sense for students. It's really crunched. So you do the FAFSA in the fall, or you try to do it in the fall. That little key unlocks some information that schools that you're applying to use. In Vermont, VSAC uses it for the state grant. And then they do all this calculating, and then they usually will send you an offer sometime, depending on when you apply, between like late winter, early spring, so that some schools make you decide May 1st. And then some will give you more flexibility around that. But that's all kind of like, if you think about being like a professional athlete and a team is trying to get you to come play for them, like they're going to give you an offer. So it's kind of an offer letter. Like, this is what we can offer you. You can always go back and try to negotiate that. And that's called appealing your financial aid letter. The tricky piece is that sometimes scholarships from school might not come in until you've already until you graduate, which is like in June. Sometimes you have to provide more documentation to get your financial aid figured out for your school or for the state or for federal money. And that sometimes doesn't happen until close to when you have to pay your bill, which is around July. You usually get your bill around July 1, July 15th for that first semester. And they usually want it paid within a couple of weeks to a month, 2 to 4 weeks. So is that helpful, Blythe? Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Let me know if you have follow-up. And then Tylen says, if after you did the FAFSA for the first year of college and you received no federal aid at all, is this really required to fill out the FAFSA the second year? Yes. So here's something else I'll tell you. Oh, I'm going to let somebody else in. Something else that I'll tell you about the FAFSA, like I was talking about unlocking that key, or that key that unlocks this aid. They are using financial information that is really 2 years old. And so if you're a family, doing the FAFSA means that, yes, they have information. You can verify it with your taxes from 2 years before. But if you know, right now you would be using 2020 information. If you're going to college and your family's financial circumstances, you're making less money than you did when you did the FAFSA, that is information you want to update the financial aid office with. So it's always helpful to do the FAFSA, even if you didn't get federal aid, because there's always a chance that it could unlock some free aid for you. Does that answer your question, Tylen? I hope so. Let us know.
Could I ask another question?
Please do.
How old do you have to be to start building your credit score?
So there's a little bit of two answers to this question. You have to be 18 to take out a loan. However, there are some ways around it that people will do. So how tricky do you want to get? Because there's like a lot of this stuff is kind of like, if you're in the know, you can really take advantage of the system. But for most people, the answer would be no, you have to wait till you're 18 to take out a loan. That said, with credit cards, you can put someone on as an approved signer. And so what an approved signer is different than a co-signer. An approved signer is not liable for the debt. So let's say someone's parents have a credit card that they've had for like 10 years, 20 years, whatever. They've used it for a long time. They have a kid who's 13, 14, starting to do stuff outside of the home, and they add their child to their credit card as an approved signer so that in an emergency, their child can use this credit card. Maybe they don't give them a physical card. Maybe they just keep it away somewhere. That line of credit is now going to show up on their credit report. So this 13, 14-year-old is now going to have this line of credit on their credit report, building their credit. If their parents take them off, it will go away. But that's kind of the loophole there.
And so if the parents put their kid on, then when the child gets their own credit card, that just kind of, it rolls into the overall like credit report later on.
Yeah, so there will be, so let's say the situation, this person has a credit card that they were added to when they were 14, and then when they're 18, they take out their own credit card. Now they have 2 lines of credit, also sometimes called trade lines, and they'll show up on their credit report saying, you know, Capital One, opened in this date, here's the limit, here's the balance, and here's the monthly minimum. And then it will say, you know, MasterCard, and it'll have all the information for their other one.
And it will kind of show up as if the 13 or 14-year-old had been paying off on the first credit card.
Yes. Yeah, so that's one of those tricky ways that like people who are very privileged continue to stay that way. Our financial system looks like that.
So would it be helpful? I just want to say we just have about 4 minutes. So these questions are great. Keep the questions coming.
Would it be helpful for me to pull up a sample credit report? Because I do have one. And you can just kind of take a peek.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Cool, great. Alrighty. And it is pictures. It's going to take me just 1 second to pull it up.
Also, so the first credit card that the 13 or 14-year-old had been added to, if their parents removed them from that after they got their own credit card, would the first report still be viewable?
No. So when you close a line of credit, a credit card, you finish paying off a loan, whatever it is, that is closed, and it will show on your credit report as closed. So I have that's not the right one.
And Katie, I'm wondering if for time, do you want to give folks just your contact information so that I wonder if, like with the credit question, they're such good questions, but maybe they could hear how to find you after the session.
Yes, absolutely. So the easiest way is to send me an email, and I will just type that in our group here. Or my line is.
Because am I right that you also do some individual financial counseling with folks?
Yes, yeah. And so if anyone is interested, one of the things I do is pull credit and take a look at what your credit score is, what needs to happen to make any changes that you want to make. Okay, so are you guys seeing this new one here? Oh, shoot. I'm going to speed through. Sorry about the flashing. Okay, great. So this is a credit report that's broken down into a few different sections. The first section you see is identification. This is where, like, this is surprisingly important because if your name has any kind of different spellings, anything like that, you might have other people's information being reported incorrectly in your report. And then you see your credit score. Oh, yeah, okay. So this is kind of that point where we're looking at the actual lines of credit. So for this one here, like you can see, this one says paid. And so that means that it's closed. It's still showing up on their credit report, but it doesn't impact their credit score as much. So it's a little bit, it's definitely weird and a little complicated.
But would that be a good thing to follow up with you about?
So yes, that would definitely be a good thing
Okay.
to follow up on. Yeah.
Cool. Well, Katie, do you want to, is there anything you want to say before I do my wrap up piece?
I don't think so. Yeah, if you guys want to ever have a conversation about your situation, you know, I think one thing that's really important to me is to make sure that people are happy and comfortable and confident in their financial choices. And I'm never going to tell someone that they need to stop spending money on the things that are important to them. I think that's an old style of financial counseling that says, you know, you can't buy a house because you're buying too many lattes, and that's just not true. So feel free to email me or sign up to do a counseling session, and good luck with whatever you choose to do next.
Thanks, Katie. And I'm going to put in the chat, everybody, you have a 14-minute break before your next workshop, before the next workshops start. They'll be posting recordings for this session, probably within the next week or so on vsac.org/CCP. And then if you need a link to get to the other workshops in the program, I put it in the chat. But thank you all for coming and for asking such fantastic questions. And Katie, thank you for your time and expertise. All right, take care, everybody. Have a good Saturday.